It's Wednesday, October 2nd. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. It is a hell of a day to talk ball, and joining me to do just that is the one and only Sal Vetri. Sal, what's going on, buddy?
Not too much, man. Yeah, week 5, bye weeks are here. We got to start replacing some people, making some moves, making some trades. For the second time in the last 3 weeks, my most important league, I lose to a 20-point performance kicker, so I need that to stop happening as well. But yeah, I'm excited for week 5.
Yeah, man. Bye weeks are here. What a time. No Lions this week. No Titans. Who cares? Eagles, Chargers. There's some interesting players off the board. So I feel like what we do here every week, where we try to give people the stats that really matter for the Wednesday data dump, is going to be more critical than ever. Whether you're looking for some replacement players, maybe some sneaky starts, or just guys that are trending upwards, downwards, whatever. I'm feeling good, man. Week 5. The season is starting to roll. I'm in the rhythm. It's great stuff. Okay. Again, this is sort of the pod every single week where we pivot from what happened before to what is coming this week. We're leaving week 4 in the past. We're starting to look ahead to week 5 and beyond. But before we do that, Sal, a couple pieces of news I think to hit on here that we did not talk about on yesterday's podcast. We should probably just touch on here really quick. 2 pieces of running back injury news. First one, Browns head coach Kevin Stefanski said the team will open the 21-day return window for Nick Chubb. Obviously, we know Nick Chubb is coming off that devastating knee injury from last year. There's a couple of teams, Sal, where one dynasty team and one redraft team where I've got Nick Chubb stashed on an IR spot. I took him in, especially in the redraft league, very, very late. And, I really wasn't expecting him to come back at this point. I thought it might be a little bit longer. Look, they're only opening the 21-day window. We have no idea, when/if he'll be returning to the field, the whole deal. It's a complicated knee injury he's coming back from, but this is pretty welcome news for people that have been stashing Nick Chubb. Again, no idea what he's going to look like coming off this injury, but again, having Nick Chubb in our lives is always a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. Credit to him, because it seems like he'll probably be coming back around week 7. And that was an insane injury that most people probably take 2 years to come back from, and he's going to come back in just over a year. So credit to Nick Chubb. He's a monster. But that's the thing. If he comes back, let's just say it's towards the end of that window, it's week 7. My guess is they're probably going to take weeks to really ramp him up if he ever gets back to a full workload. We probably don't even see that this year. Right now, the Browns situation doesn't look great. The offensive line's been banged up. They have guys on injuries. So it's not like the most interesting situation, but you probably spent a 10th round draft pick on him. He's in your IR spot. So you're just getting free points at this point. Jerome Ford hasn't been that exciting, and the other running backs back there. So yeah, once he comes back, you see what it is. Probably takes a couple of weeks, but maybe right in time for the fantasy postseason, you get Nick Chubb back, which is a welcome sight.
Yeah, if your team stinks and you've been stashing Nick Chubb, this probably isn't that great. I don't think that Nick Chubb is going to be the thing that comes in and saves your season, but I like the way you framed this, that by the end of the regular season here in fantasy football, maybe towards the playoffs, he's really getting ramped up. And I will say this, it's always been interesting, and from a football perspective, I've always been fascinated at how the Browns sort of transition away from the identity that Kevin Stefanski, I think, wants to have as an offensive team, and the identity with Nick Chubb being the central point, right? This very under center, ground and pound type of team, more heavier formations, to what Deshaun Watson does well, theoretically. What Deshaun Watson used to do well in Houston, and he's never done well here, even here in Cleveland. It's spread the field, get in shotgun, get in empty, and kind of point and shoot, that type of offense. Man, you watch the Cleveland Browns right now. You watch them against the Raiders last week. They can't do the latter. Okay, they cannot, with the offensive line injuries that you point out. Maybe that affects the run game too. I mean, they're 30th in rushing success rate on the year, but they can't really play that way because, one, their receivers are good players, but they haven't really played great this year. Amari Cooper has dropped a lot of passes. He's made some big plays. He had a big play called back in this game. He's also left a lot of plays on the field. Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, those guys are volatile players, and straight up, they just can't pass protect, and I don't think that Watson can really be the identity point of their offense. So I do think maybe we see a return to the Nick Chubb centric offense when he gets back. It's just so complicated with the health perspective of it all.
Yeah, and it's also where is this team in 4 to 6 to 7 weeks? Is it a situation where they're trying to see new players on their offense to kind of see what they have for next year. If they're still in contention, I think you're going to start to see some things move around for all the reasons you just mentioned. And I will say that the offensive line injuries should be getting better. Jack Conklin seems to finally be getting healthy. 3 more weeks until Wyatt Teller can come off the IR, so that would be right around that time frame of when Nick Chubb could return, and maybe we start to see something out of the run game.
Yeah, Amari Cooper has been floated in trade rumors as well. They could potentially be trying to see what they have in Jameis Winston if Deshaun Watson doesn't give them any better play. So yeah, you're right that projecting 5-6 weeks ahead of time for the Cleveland Browns might be a bit of a fool's errand, but regardless, I think it's good news for Nick Chubb just to be back in our lives earlier than expected. On the other end of timeline news here, Panthers head coach Dave Canales said that the team will not open the 21-day practice window for Jonathon Brooks, their rookie running back, also coming off of a knee injury this week. So we get at least one more week of Chuba Hubbard, who you said it on last week's show, Sal, as long as he is out there as the starting back and Andy Dalton's under center, Chuba Hubbard is a must start. That delivered pretty well in the week 4 game against the Cincinnati Bengals. How do we feel about Chuba Hubbard in week 5 against the Chicago Bears? A little bit of a more intimidating defense.
Yeah, more intimidating defense, but you're seeing him involved in the passing game still. I think the role of just 20-plus touches weekly for an offense that looks a lot better under Andy Dalton is nice. Like, Chuba Hubbard just has to be a must-start for you, probably in every single league that's a 12-man or deeper because of the bye weeks coming into play. Saquon Barkley's on bye, these types of things as well. So, yeah, Jonathon Brooks, that window not opening isn't ideal, but it's also not the end of the world. Like, it was kind of this week 5 to week 7 timeline for a return, and the expectation seems to always be sort of like the Nick Chubb, where probably start to get ramped up by week 8, 9, the second half of the season. And the reason you draft him, put him in your IR spot, is towards that back half playoff run, which, again, is not going to help you right now, depending on your record. But once you get there, it could help you. That's kind of the league-winning formula you're trying to play for with a guy like that, a second-round pick.
Yeah, the Panthers have a bye in week 11, so we're ways away from that. I could still see Chuba Hubbard being pretty involved. Week 7 against the Commanders, that's a good matchup. Week 10 against the Giants, that's potentially a pretty good matchup. So there will still be spots, even when Brooks gets back, maybe before that bye, where Hubbard is useful. And then hopefully coming out of that bye, they're really willing and ready to trust Jonathon Brooks. But we'll see. It might just end up being more of a, not a redshirt year, but like a bit of a slower paced rookie season for the Carolina Panthers back, Jonathon Brooks.
Yeah, and I think that the Hubbard success is probably just feeding into that. Like, there's no need to get a playmaker or a guy in the backfield to rush back when Hubbard is playing this well right now, like one of the best efficiency backs in the league the past 2 weeks.
All right, so with that news in the books, let's get into what we do here every single week. Welcome to the data dump coming out of week 4.
Yes, science!
My calculations are correct. You're going to see some serious.
We're switching things up this week, Sal. I'm going to let you go first this week for your 5 stats that people need to know. 1, because I'm such a gracious guy. 2, big news. I'm such a gracious guy. 2, we're in the thick of the season now. We're going to need some things to break up the monotony. If I can do that by just switching up the order here, that's important. And 3, I thought you had some really great stats in this one, like a bunch that I'm really interested to talk about. So hit me with your first stat that people need to know here.
Yeah, definitely. My first stat is related to the Packers wide receiver usage after Christian Watson went down. This is a big storyline in fantasy because waiver wires are about to be run after Tuesday night, and Dontavian Wicks is a huge priority. The stat that I want to bring up is the target shares once Watson left that game. Wicks led the way with a 25% target share. Dobbs and Tucker Kraft, the tight end, 17%, and Jayden Reed at 15%. Now, a couple things stand out. I'm not concerned with Jayden Reed at 15%. He gets involved in other ways, and overall, this is a small sample we're talking about. I kind of have Jayden Reed, at least for me, like in my mind, I view him like Tyreek Hill, Deebo Samuel, these explosive types of players that just one touch absolutely changes the game in the wide receiver room. So not concerned about that. Dontavian Wicks is the bigger story here. 13 targets, couple of touchdowns, dropped a couple passes, almost dropped one of his touchdowns. Like, that is a real thing. I know it's easy to just say, like, okay, drops aren't sticky. He's a talented receiver. He has been since last year. And largely, I do agree with that. But for the whole season, it hasn't just been this game. He's had some problems catching the ball. So that has to come through. That could lose some opportunities for you, of course. But overall, since the start of last year, this is via Jacob Gibbs on Twitter. Dontavian Wicks right now, his fantasy points per route run since the start of 2023, his rookie year, he currently ranks only behind Jamar Chase, Chris Olave, Devontae Adams, and DK Metcalf in fantasy points per route run. And that's not like an extremely small sample. He was seeing some real usage last year towards the second half of the season. And I think he's going to get that usage now because they're not giving a timeline. The Packers always do this. He's not going to miss 1 to 2 to 3, or he could miss 1 to 2 to 3 weeks. We don't know yet based on the IR news, but he's definitely going to miss this week. So I think Wicks is a priority. Hopefully you get him on the waivers by the time you're listening to this. And the usage was just interesting to see in week 4.
Yeah, he'll probably be a top 30 ranked receiver for me this week. I think he's a really, really good player. You look at routes run from the second to fourth quarter. So after Christian Watson's gone, Romeo Doubs 44, Tucker Kraft 41, Jaden Reed 40, Dontavian Wicks 40. So he's a big time player for them. I'm glad that you pointed out the drops, because I am definitely one of the people that says, hey, drops are not a sticky stat. The fact that he is still, after those drops, that he's still trusted by Jordan Love, especially in the red zone. Those are important things. But the guy has had drop issues, not just this year, even dating back to his rookie season when he had a really good reception perception profile. He was flashed in a ton of these efficiency metrics, some of which you pointed out here, like fantasy points per route run, yards per route run, first downs per route run. Basically, whenever he's been on the field and he's gotten opportunities, he's gotten the football because he's a good player, man. Just from his reception perception profile from his rookie season, this is a guy who lined up outside on 64.6% of his sampled snaps. He was in the slot for 30.2%. So a guy that can play multiple positions here, which I think is important because with Watson out, he's going to be kind of a slot flanker for them, whereas Jaden Reed's the full-time slot and Romeo Doubs is that X receiver for them. So he has a clear-cut role here. But he can play multiple positions, which is pretty critical because Green Bay does not want to be static with their wide receiver usage. That's why they love having all of these guys. He's a player who beats man coverage to 71st percentile, press coverage 69th percentile. So a lot of really good indicators that for me, I would say for people that are new to reception perception, if you just want to know, like, all right, what are some receivers I should be interested in? If there's a guy that lines up majority outside and beats man coverage over 70% and press coverage over 70%, like, we're interested. We've got our eyes on that guy. So Wicks is a player that I was hoping could find his way into opportunity this year. That opportunity has arrived here. And the next 2 weeks, they said Christian Watson's not going to play this week. I think he's probably not going to play for a few weeks. High ankle sprain here. He's certainly not going to be, like, who knows when he'll be back to a full-time role, even when he does get back. Next, I'll even say just the next 5 weeks before the week 10 bye. Rams this week, Cardinals in week 6, Houston in week 7. That could be a high-scoring game. Houston's defense has been generally good, but a little up and down. Jacksonville in week 8. Talk about beating man coverage. The Jags play a bunch of man coverage. They're not very good at it. And the Lions defense in week 9, that's another game that could potentially be a shootout in Green Bay. So really great schedule for all these wide receivers going forward.
Yeah, and the next 2 matchups, those teams both rank last and second to last in passing yards per play allowed, according to NFL Pro. So it's just a great spot overall. This is what we were hoping for in the offseason, like an increased role one way or another, whether it be via injury or play for Dontavian Wicks. It's coming right now via injury, but there's a chance even when Watson returns that you just see Wicks command this wide receiver 3 and maybe even wide receiver 2 job ahead of Doubs.
Yeah, I think the 2 best receivers on the Packers roster is Jaden Reed, gap to everybody else, but then Dontavian Wicks is
that's a heck of a draft by the Packers. Those 2 dudes in the same draft.
2 dudes in the same draft, and like they, to some degree, I don't think they're as good, but they hit on Watson and Doubs too. Like I think Watson's more of a role. Both those guys are probably more role players. I think these 2 guys you can funnel targets to, but yeah, I mean, back-to-back years, you get 4 guys that are pretty damn good, and you pick up Bo Melton off waivers too, another young player. So, and Tucker Kraft, like you mentioned him, we talked about Tucker Kraft a lot with Scott yesterday on the Panic Meter pod, and he's a guy that I think is a tight end 1 at this point as well. So, Jordan Love's first return to action was a little shaky, a little up and down. He's always going to be a guy that's kind of high in the big time throw percentage, but also high in the turnover worthy percentage. That stuff does tend to balance out, and it can be good news for these fantasy receivers. So Dontavian Wicks, probably a fantasy starter. Hopefully you get him off the waiver wire. Let's just hope he can hold on to the ball consistently. Okay, let's move on to another wide receiver here for your second stat that people need to know.
Yeah, Drake London's usage, specifically the last 3 weeks, because we started the season with a lot of panic. Drake London, 2 catches for 15 yards. Everybody on the internet believed that Kirk Cousins maybe couldn't even ever walk again after what we saw in week 1. There was just no mobility for him. But since then, everything's turned around. First read target share of 34%. That leads this team, and it's borderline top 10, right around top 12 amongst wide receivers, up there with the Justin Jeffersons, the Devonta Smiths of the world. And what we're getting right now these last few weeks, and especially in week 4, 12 targets, great volume. Only 7 of them were catchable, so that's not great. We need Kirk Cousins' accuracy to come down. But I do think that that's going to get there based on just his career stats. I don't think the Achilles is overall going to lead to 50% catchable ball rate the rest of the season. And I think that's where some big plays can open up for London even more, because he's already producing in fantasy. Maybe even after this past week, he's somewhat of a buy low candidate since he didn't find the end zone. But if we can just get 12 targets and the usage that we're getting out of him in that game, you see him being put in motion. There was a key play I have here. Deep pass, second quarter. It was 2nd and 6. Cousin misses London. He's wide open for 25 yards. This is one of those plays that catch and run, maybe it's a 30-yard gain, that are going to start clicking in the second half of the year, whether it's the injury for Kirk Cousins or just really the chemistry, trying to get there with one Drake London when Cousins wasn't really active in the preseason or camp that much. So yeah, I think everything's trending up for London right now heading into week 5. He's a guy that I do think is somebody you can buy and trade for in fantasy leagues. Hasn't had an explosion week. And the last 3 weeks look great.
I love this. Yeah, I think he is a buy low. People still seem really pissed about the Drake London stuff. We always have to remember there's a lot of new here. New offensive coordinator, new quarterback. Like Drake London's playing in a new role as well. I talked about this in the offseason where in Arthur Smith's offense, he was basically just tethered to the line of scrimmage. He was an X receiver. He didn't really move around the formation. You highlighted it. He's being put in motion a ton. He's off the ball. They're scheming things for Drake London. And I think Kirk will be more comfortable taking those throws as time goes on. They're still working on their timing and chemistry. It took Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson like a minute to figure it out. And look, Drake London is not going to be as good as Justin Jefferson. I like Drake London. He's probably not going to be as good. Most receivers are not going to become Justin Jefferson, okay? But from a connection standpoint, they can get there. I think more time on task is good for these two dudes. And I agree with you. Like Cousins, he's sort of pitched about as this like steady Eddie type of quarterback but because at the end of the year, the numbers always look good. It's like, man, that was a pretty good season for Kirk Cousins, but it's always a journey with Kirk Cousins to get there. He's a bit of an up and down quarterback. And especially right now, as he's figuring out what he can and can't do post Achilles, he gets more comfortable on the surgically repaired Achilles. I do feel like by the end of the year, things will look pretty good for Kirk Cousins and Drake London especially. I think Kirk Cousins and Drake London will get that connection down. And Sal, I feel like I feel about as I always felt with Drake London this season, which is that he's probably going to moonwalk to the best season of his career, and people will still be disappointed because of just how high he went in fantasy. But I think that's an emotional response, not a logical response. And that seems like a great opportunity to take advantage for buy low potential opportunities.
Yeah, he was basically a 2nd-round pick everywhere in fantasy this year, and you can probably trade like a 3rd-round pick or maybe even a 4th-round pick for him right now. Like in that game in week 4, it just like his first target and his usage, it just summed up everything about how he's being used. First target, he gets put in motion. He earns the target. He earns a reception. Everything looked good. The mixture of targets over the middle of the field. Now he plays on Thursday Night Football, kind of hard in terms of content to like tell people to buy low. But yeah, go ahead and buy low if you're listening to this before Thursday night, where on Thursday night, what happens? Quarterbacks key in on their first read, which has been Drake London a lot more because you don't have as much to game plan against the defense. Matchup against the Bucs, fine matchup overall. So London is somebody who's trending up.
Yeah, the next few weeks for the Atlanta Falcons, they get the Bucs twice. You mentioned they get them on Thursday night, then they get the Panthers, the Seahawks, and again the Bucs in week 8. So if you just look at those defenses, Panthers 30th in passing success rate allowed, Bucs 24th in passing success rate allowed, and the Seahawks kind of tough to gauge them right now at this point because they got ripped up on Monday night by the Detroit Lions, which was really the first good passing team that they faced. So I think it's all wheels up for Drake London, these guys going forward. Let's stick in the NFC South and talk about some more wide receivers on a different team in that division.
Yeah, the Carolina Panthers, they played their first game of the season without wide receiver Adam Thielen, and the target shares in that game, number 1, Deontay Johnson, 34%. All that tells us, certified stud right now in fantasy with Andy Dalton. Number 2, though, and this is the important piece here, Xavier Legette, 24% target share. This was a career high easily in his 4th ever game. And look, he produced on these. He earns 10 targets, 76 total yards, gets a couple carries in this game, finds the end zone as well, nearly 20 fantasy points, and what was basically his first extended run. So a couple things stand out. Clearly ahead of Jonathan Mingo. We can now just know that for sure. Heading into like waivers, everybody feels comfortable that he's probably the wide receiver 2 on this team. until Thielen comes back, which is at least 3 weeks, could be longer, and even then could still be the wide receiver 2 to get a first-round talent. But I really like the way that he was being used in this game. First quarter, there's a 3rd and 9. They go to Leggett. He picks it up over the middle of the field. Middle of the field is key. In the second quarter on a 2nd and 7, catch and run over the middle of the field for a big game. And the exact same thing, a 17-yard gain in the 4th quarter, a key 2nd and 9, picks it up for 17 yards, catch and run. And this is where we kind of saw in college, like his calling card. Big 220-pound receiver, fast, after the catch production. So the fact that he's already being schemed as a rookie, that production, and now increased usage, I think it's great. I think it's overall great. I think he's somebody who, to me, is probably a borderline top 5 overall waiver pickup the entire year so far. I think there's a lot of upside in this offense that looks like it can sustain a number 2 option under Andy Dalton, which seems crazy to say that, but it's true.
But it is true, because this offense is just well designed, well coached, and they're doing things right at this point. So looking right now, obviously it's Tuesday afternoon as we tape this. People will be listening to this on Wednesday, so this will have changed. But right now, Xavier Leggett is just 14% rostered in Yahoo leagues. I guarantee that's going to come up because of the stats in the box score from week number 4. But I'm so glad that you highlighted the usage, because this is a lot of what I saw. I mean, again, like I'm looking at your notes and I see run over the middle, catch over the middle, like all this type of stuff, catch and run things. And when Xavier Leggett was drafted, this is exactly the type of role I wanted to see him in. Again, revisiting his reception perception prospect profile, he did primarily line up as the X receiver for South Carolina, the Gamecocks there. There was no way that was going to be his role in the NFL because of his skill set. He is a 19th percentile press man coverage player. That's not going to be, you're not going to win on the outside with those numbers, at least consistently. You're not going to get high volume. But where you can get high volume is if you move him around the formation, which they did, played a little bit of slot, played a little bit outside, and have him run these horizontal breaking routes. His 2 best routes in reception perception, slant and dig. A lot of this over the middle stuff that you're highlighting, and even like quick flat routes, which it was kind of the play that he scored a touchdown on. So I love what I'm seeing from Leggett from a usage standpoint. It's beautiful to me, Sal, when you see a smart coach. I think Canales is a smart coach. Take a guy who's kind of, I definitely raw. Like he's a bit of a mold of clay project type of guy, and just use him in the exact type of ways I would want to see. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity for Xavier Leggett. Again, pulling up the schedule for the Carolina Panthers. Obviously, the Bears matchup this week is a little more difficult. It is another revenge game for Andy Dalton, though. Falcons, Commanders, Broncos, Saints, Giants heading into that bye week. There are some opportunities there where Leggett might be startable, but some other defenses that are tougher. Broncos are playing great defense right now, and the Saints always have a pretty good stop unit.
Yeah, I think some of those matchups sound great, and those are the exact weeks that you start him, assuming Thielen is still out heading into the byes. This is a guy that, at this point in the season, it's pretty rare that you can pick up a player, feel comfortable that in a couple of matchups he could be your flex, maybe even your wide receiver too if you're in a bind. So that's why I think he's a priority right now, assuming you can't get a Dontavian Wicks.
Yeah, I like that call. And he might not have a big week against the Bears, and then people might drop him. You know what I'm saying? Something like that. So, but yeah, if you're missing an opportunity, if you're missing Amon-Ra St. Brown, one of these guys, obviously the Eagles are on bye. Those guys haven't been playing recently. Maybe Leggett is a decent little fill-in off the waiver wire. Okay, let's talk about the Panthers player in that game. The Bengals running back rotation. We got some interesting clues potentially in this one.
Yeah, Chase Brown, his usage is trending up in this. We've now seen it for 3 straight weeks. Very slowly in week 2 and week 3, the snaps were coming up, but in sort of a major way relative to those weeks in week 4. You get 42% of the snaps, handles 52% of the backfield carries, one more than Zach Moss in this game, and puts up a good game. 17 overall touches, 92 yards, 2 touchdowns. Couple of key things to point out in this game. He scored both his touchdowns on a 1-yard run and a 3-yard run. So goal line carries. That's important. Zach Moss also had a goal line touch as well. So they're splitting this backfield at least based on week 4 usage. And that's kind of what we thought in the preseason in camp. Okay, it's probably going to be this. I think they mentioned 1A, 1B split backfield here, but we didn't see it to start the year. Now we're getting there. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden Chase Brown keeps trending up and now he's the starting running back. I think Zach Moss will definitely still be involved right now. But it is good to see that this is a split backfield. And when that happens, Chase Brown's an explosive player, an exciting player, and he could put up these big weeks for you, an RB1 week like he had. Another thing I noticed was he's a fast guy. He's a big back. He's kind of known for these outside zone runs, at least based on college. But in this game, his best run up the middle, he cuts back on a 1 cut and he goes into the second level for a 20-yard gain. The vision looked a little bit better. Again, a small sample of, 12, 15 carries in this game, but things were looking nice for him. He's currently leading the NFL in broken tackle rate, which was something last year. Broken tackles weren't there as much. So I think this is good. Anytime you have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins on the outside, He'll take the defense's attention. You'll get some lighter boxes. So even in tougher matchups, he could still get you there. Chase Brown's trending up. I don't think he's on many waiver wires, maybe like 35, 40%. For some reason, if people got frustrated to start the year. But right now, he's a buy candidate for me. I don't know if people will be selling him off this big week, but everything looks good if you were able to hold out on like your 10th round pick in the summer in Chase Brown.
Yeah, he is 62% rostered in Yahoo leagues right now. So he was definitely a guy that was dropped, and he'll be picked back up, obviously, with the result of 2 touchdowns. But I'm agreeing with you here that like he's a guy who is trending up, and this is why, man, you don't want to be dropping these guys, even if they were. And I got a lot of questions about Chase Brown because I thought he was a good draft pick. I thought him and Zach Moss were both good draft picks for basically the same reason, in that I think both these guys are talented, and this is an offense you want to be invested in. It's a pretty good ecosystem for a back here, and got a lot of questions early on, like, oh man, do I drop Chase Brown for insert, high scoring goofball off the waiver wire here? It's like, dude, don't drop one of these guys. Cause like, let's just say Zach Moss gets hurt. Like Chase Brown would be high end RB2, like definitely somebody you're starting if Moss ever goes down, and vice versa there too. If anything ever happened to Chase Brown, same thing for Zach Moss. He'd probably just become like an 80% snap player in that situation.
Yeah, and you're getting the offense, at least the last 2 weeks, from a fantasy perspective and in real life. Like the offense is looking better. Joe Burrow looks definitely healthy, maybe a little bit more confident in his health mentally as well, coming off the injury. T. Higgins is back. I think that's a big piece of this. So it's a quality offense. Like that looked a little bit sketchy the first 2 weeks of the season. But anytime you can get an explosive player who's now seeing around 50% of the opportunities potentially in a high volume offense, yeah, that has to be on your team, and it's going to be a weekly flex option, especially during the buys for you. You get matchups against like the Ravens and Browns coming up. Those aren't appealing, but he's getting light boxes. He's seen the 4th most light carry front according to Player Profiler right now. And that's because of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins being there. You just can't put more resources in the box if you're a defense, because you're susceptible against those guys like we've seen the last few weeks at times up top. So I think it's just a good situation for both backs, but we're specifically talking about Chase Brown since the usage is trending up.
Yeah, Ravens, Giants, Browns, the next 3 weeks, some tougher defenses in there, some tougher defensive fronts, but that could just mean maybe some dump off passes for Chase Brown. So definitely a guy that could be a valuable player in the back half of the fantasy season. Definitely someone, if he was dropped in your league, I'm sure he'll get picked up by the time people listen to this. But yeah, I love to see his usage trending up. Somehow, Sal, we're going to another damn NFC South team for your 5th and final note here that people need to know coming out of week 4.
Yeah, this is going to be the Saints wide receiver, Rashid Shaheed. Has he been unlocked? I think so, at least based on what we saw in week 4. Week 4, career high 11 targets, gets a 30% target share. This is off of a week where he scored 0 points. So a lot of people might have been able to buy low, and you were immediately rewarded. He gets 8 catches. He gets a couple of rush attempts, 97 total yards. Also could have had another big play in this game, just like in week 3. Didn't come through for him. So now what we're looking at through 4 games this year, 27% target share, currently leads the team ahead of Olave barely. 52% of the air yards is the key piece there. That leads the team by a wide margin, and he's top 10 in the NFL as of this morning in yards per route run. So we kind of knew he was this efficient player, like an explosive downfield guy. And in the offseason, we were hoping that we would maybe get some more usage with Clint Kubiak over the middle of the field. We saw it in the first few weeks, but we saw it a lot this past week. We saw middle of the field catch and run opportunities, lots of yards after the catch. There was a key also 3rd down and 3, where he basically just runs this quick route and picks it up. He picks up the 3 yards basically on the dot. That's really not something we were seeing last year, like these technical routes to pick up a first down, move the chains for Rashid Shaheed. So I think in that play, he comes in motion, runs to the right side, Carr hits him quick. So I think it's just interesting, the evolution of the usage. You still get the deep downfield shots like we saw week 1, week 2, and even sprinkled into these past few games, but a little bit more consistency in the production is what we saw in week 4. And I think he's been unlocked. I think he's a guy now that is a strong asset on any fantasy team.
Yeah, I mean, you look at almost all of his big plays this season, it's all of these in-breaking routes. And then you're right to highlight on his 4 catches, like 3 of them are on these in-breaking routes. One of which is intermediate, one of which is a deep shot here in week number 2. And that's the strength of his game from a route running perspective. He was a guy, when I posted the route chart from him in the offseason from reception perception, people made the Zoolander joke, Sal, because if you look at, post, dig, curl, slant, all green, all above average success rate. You look at out, flat, comeback, corner, all red, all below the average success rate, which the route, like people line up on multiple sides of the field. Just because he's running one way doesn't mean he can't turn left. That's not what that means. It's just the way the route tree is designed. So no need for the Zoolander memes, although it is funny. I just love to see the usage here. Like all these in-breaking routes, those are his best plays, both from, I think, a timing rhythm perspective. I think he understands leverage a little bit more when he's working over the middle as opposed to breaking the outside. But it's just his speed, man. And then when he's put in motion here, that's when it's really sick, because if he gets that full speed head start, there's not many corners who can stick with him. I think he's just a number 2 receiver in the NFL. I don't think and I thought that when after charting his film in the offseason, like this is a guy that you can just have as your secondary target. And yeah, you're right. He's got more targets than Olave. I don't know that that's necessarily going to hold, but I do think there's a chance they can be very, very close. And I think Olave will be fine. I don't really have any panic on Olave. I think he's having a nice season so far, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Rashid Shaheed's going to go down as one of the biggest values in this year. Even if the Saints offense regresses, I don't think like his spike week potential is going to be any lower at this point.
Yeah, definitely want Olave, top 15, probably real life receiver in around that range in fantasy rest of season for me. But yeah, Shaheed, value. 13th round, maybe you got him in this offseason. He's just getting design plays. Multiple carries in multiple games this year as well. Those are all nice things we like to see. Coaches just putting him into the playbook every single week, and you're getting rewarded with it on these big plays. And again, the past 2 weeks, he's also just missed deep play touchdowns for either drop reasons or just barely thrown off guard. So every single week he's out there with a big play. Keep him in your lineups.
I will throw out the schedule here for the New Orleans Saints. They get the Chiefs this week. Tougher matchup, but I would always say like, high scoring game. Maybe not with this version of the Kansas City Chiefs, but they'll be on Monday night. Definitely still a defense that, you can maybe take a shot on there, but Bucks in week 6, you can get them. Panthers in week 9, you get the Falcons in week 10. We just saw what he just did to the Falcons. So there are some tougher matchups. Chargers defense is playing well. They get them in week 8. Broncos defense is playing well. They get them in week 7. But these NFC South matchups sprinkled in with the NFC West or AFC West matchups, will be pretty interesting. Okay, let's take a quick break here. When we come back, we'll run through the stats that I have for you in the week 5 data dump right after this. All right, Sal, we're back. Let's get into the 5 stats I think people need to know coming out of week 4. Number 1, Justin Fields is now the QB6 on the season. In week 4, he had a season high 42 dropbacks. He had 10 for 55 and 2 touchdowns as a rusher. Worth noting, according to Fantasy Points data, that 4 for 16 and the 2 touchdowns came on scrambles. So actually some of the designed runs were pretty efficient plays for the Steelers, which I think was good to see, because coming into that week 4 game, and I know the Colts front 7 has been run on this year, but coming into that week 4 game, those designed plays had not been great, not been that efficient for Justin Fields and the Steelers. But I think more time together, starting established as the starter, the clear-cut guy with Arthur Smith there coordinating the offense, like things are going pretty well, and they're figuring out how to use Fields as a designed rusher. 7.95 adjusted net yards per attempt was 7th best among quarterbacks in week 4. This also coincided with a big week from George Pickens, 3rd among all pass catchers with 158 air yards. I know they lost the game, Sal. I know that Justin Fields wasn't perfect. He lost. He took 3 sacks that were on the fault of the quarterback. He is always going to have mistakes, things like that. He's not a perfect player. But I'm hoping that the Steelers continue to unleash Fields a little more. I think that even though they lost this game, it wasn't totally his fault they lost it or anything like that. I think they'll continue to sort of let him off the leash a little bit here. And honestly, Sal, I kind of think they need to, because their run game, despite being excited about the Steelers' run game, has not been good this year. So I feel like Fields right now is slowly creeping into just kind of an every week start at quarterback. And I think George Pickens remains a player that there is more meat on the bone in terms of his fantasy season the rest of the way.
Yeah, and Matt, would you believe me if I said as of right now, he's available in 68% of Yahoo leagues? Like, this is a guy, when week 1 came up, only rostered in 32%. When week 1 came up, I thought he was a guy that you had to just go up and pick up. Now, I think after this performance, he's probably going to get picked up in a ton of leagues. But this is a guy in Justin Fields that, look, he had the great matchup against the Colts. We saw Caleb Williams and all the pass catchers there go off in week 3, but that's exactly what you're supposed to do. In these good matchups, take advantage of it, and he did it in the biggest way. And now you're getting a situation in week 4. He comes into it. The backfield's banged up. Jalen Warren ends up being out. Cordero Patterson, he gets injured after looking nice on 9 snaps. Najee Harris, 13 carries, 19 yards. So yeah, dialing up these design runs and getting them to work was probably a priority for Arthur Smith. And we also saw Fields, you're talking about just the throwing. Yeah, I think it's taking steps forward in this game specifically. Big throws, middle of the field, downfield as well. It's encouraging. that in a new situation, like he looks like a totally different player. Offensive line is going to help that for sure. And also something I just want to note about this whole offense kind of also helps Fields as well, especially on those design runs. Darnell Washington, the tight end, he's blocking on 75% of his snaps. He's played 141 snaps, blocking on 75% of them. That's definitely a big piece of this offense. Like we know Arthur Smith wants to run the ball. Probably saw Darnell Washington and thought, great, another offensive lineman. But for Darnell Washington's family, like change the position, like get this guy some more money and become, I don't know, a left tackle, a right tackle, because right now that's what he's being used as. And I think it's just feeding into all of this Pittsburgh offense and what's helping Fields in the situation.
I don't know, though. Did you see him hurdle that one dude in this game? Darnell Washington listed at 6'7", 264. I don't think so. I'll take the over on the weight on that one. He's hurdling a guy in the Indianapolis Colts defense, 15.5 yards per catch. I kind of want to see them do that like once a game, just leak him out in the flat, have Justin dump it off to him and see what could happen, just because he's so damn big and he's a pretty good athlete for somebody at that size too. So yeah, I don't know, man. I'm with you. It would definitely be good for his paycheck if he was an offensive tackle, but guy can like catch the ball and make some plays in space a little bit. I kind of want to see a little more of Darnell Washington.
Yeah, that's fair. All of it's just playing into what we're seeing right now for Fields and just the way that the offense is designed. And honestly, it probably just has to keep going that way. He's definitely not losing this job 3-1 right now. He's not making disastrous plays, interceptable passes nonstop, which would be the reason he would lose the job, at least right now. So yeah, for fantasy, week in and week out, especially in the bye weeks, a top 10 quarterback. And I don't really see that changing if this mobility keeps up.
Next 4 games before the bye week: Cowboys, Raiders, Jets, Giants. There's definitely some spots there. I mean, I'm still I'm not sure how I feel about the Cowboys defense, especially from a run defense perspective. And like Fields is their best runner at this point right now because Warren's banged up. Harris has been a little inefficient and banged up as well too. Patterson's banged up, as you mentioned. So yeah, I feel like he's going to have a healthy dose of Justin Fields rushing in week 5 and week 6 against the Raiders, another game that could be pretty interesting from a run defense perspective. They have had injuries on the offensive line. That's worth noting. Again, this is not like an ideal situation for Fields where it's like, hey, Justin, just keep the train on the tracks because we got a good offensive line and we're running the ball well. Like they need Fields to do more and more, which again, I think for George Pickens' sake, I think Pickens is just playing such good football right now, man. I kind of want to see more opportunities go his way. So hopefully we see more Fields. Hopefully we see more George Pickens because both those guys should have good fantasy seasons rest of the way. Number 2, I don't really know where I want to go with this conversation, but I just really think it needs to be noted that Brock Purdy is playing really well right now. He's number 1 in next gen stats completion percentage over expected. He's 3rd in their EPA per dropback metric. And there are not as many gimme throws either this year. He's 5th in deep throw percentage, 2nd in air yards per attempt, 10.7. He's 2nd in terms of he's the second highest tight window throw percentage. So a yard or fewer separation on the targets. And this is really despite no one from his Avengers supporting cast being healthy or fully integrated through the first 4 weeks of the season. We know Ayuk has started slow. Debo has missed a game. George Kittle has missed a game. Obviously, McCaffrey, we get like a new disturbing, probably fear bait headline about his Achilles at least once a week. We know he's not playing. Jawan Jennings has been playing. Let me put it this way, and I'm not trying to just channel my inner Dalton Del Don on this one, but the mark of a great quarterback, Sal, is, in my opinion, do you elevate the players around you? And Purdy, I think, has been a teammate elevator already, right? Like Ayuk had the best season of his career with Purdy under center. And now Jawan Jennings, who I think is a really good player. I think Jawan Jennings is good at football. I have always felt that way. But Jawan Jennings is balling out now with Brock Purdy. That's not just, oh, cool, another Shanahan superstar here. No, I feel like Purdy is elevating the situation around him. So my point in saying this is, one, just let's all acknowledge that Purdy is balling out right now. And number 2, when these guys get healthy or when Ayuk finally gets up to speed, I feel like the potential for this 49ers offense is maybe even higher than what we saw last year because the quarterback is playing better.
Yeah, and that's really plain and simple what it is. It's crazy concept here. Young players starts to actually develop even more and improve as the years go on. And look, you're paired. Yeah, right. Mind blowing. But last year he kind of gets ragged on. He's getting all these things schemed up for him. This year, like you said, the deep plays are happening. Playing under pressure, number 4 in pressured completion percentage. And he still has Kyle Shanahan. Maybe even with all these guys being injured, specifically McCaffrey for the entire year, Shanahan's kind of in his bag more, having to coach it up a little bit more. And I think that could be part of this, especially when it comes to downfield passing. Not as many dump offs going to Jordan Mason right now. But for the most part, it's just Purdy playing really well, getting enough out of the offensive line to just not be an issue for them. Like week 1, it was good. Since then, okay, blemishes here and there, but just enough to keep him upright. Like you mentioned, hobbled games out of Kittle and Debo. Really nothing out of Ayuk, 40 receiving yards per game at this point. You're still getting it done. So as long as he keeps getting to the red zone on these drives, having touchdown opportunities in the air, continues to throw downfield, like that's all great for fantasy production. And real life, he's trending up. This week, I believe he gets a matchup against the Cardinals, if I'm not mistaken. Second most passing yards per game or per play allowed. So another good spot.
Another good spot for Purdy, potentially as a fantasy starter. And yeah, I think, I talked about this yesterday on the Panic Meter show. People like, can I bench Brandon Ayuk until he goes off? Like, yeah, if you want, if that makes you feel better, stick him on your bench and get that prove it game. But like that prove it game could be literally at any point, because we know how good of a player he is, and his quarterback is playing really good football at this point. It could be week 5 against these Arizona Cardinals, week 6 Seattle Seahawks. We just saw what happened to their defense against the Lions, Chiefs, Cowboys. Bye week 9. So things are looking good for the San Francisco 49ers offense, primarily because, and usually we don't say this, but primarily because their quarterback is just playing damn good football right now while making high degree of difficulty plays. Third stat I think people need to know. Let's talk a little bit about the Houston Texans early down offense and why I think this is kind of sinking the whole unit. And I say sinking, like it's fine, but sinking below the expectations that we had. So overall, stick with me on this. There's a lot of dork stats here, people out there. Okay, overall, the Texans are 28th in offensive EPA per play and success rate on early down. So that's first and second down. If you take out week 1, they rank 32nd in rushing EPA and success rate overall. And honestly, like it's not even close. 31st, I believe, is the Raiders. And I think there's like a pretty good gap between them and the Raiders. And we know the Raiders stink. They're like a historically bad rushing offense. That does obviously coincide with Joe Mixon not being here. I think that is something to discuss. Mixon, when he gets back, could be a pretty big difference maker. But I would also say that the offensive line is not playing great football this year. They're the most penalized team in the league this year. Overall, 40 penalties, and they've lost the second most yards to penalties, 171 yards lost to penalties. They've also lost the third most yards due to sacks behind the Bears and Browns. Like, let me tell you what, CJ Stroud is not Caleb Williams or Deshaun Watson in terms of like eating sacks and losing big gains to sacks. I think Stroud's playing great. Obviously, Nico Collins is a baller. I think the Stephon Diggs addition has been a success. The run game remains a problem, and the early down offense has been an issue so far. Like Sal, sometimes we get these questions like, what's going on with the Houston offense? Why aren't they hitting their potential? Sometimes the most simple football answers are the answers to these complicated questions. They're being penalized too much. The offensive line isn't playing great, and they're struggling to run the football. So they get in a lot of these like long down and distance situations, and CJ Stroud has to play kind of hero ball to bail them out. But I guess what's your confidence level that this Texans offense can really get rolling here? Maybe, I mean, is Joe Mixon just the difference here once they get him back there, or are there deeper problems here?
Yeah, I think confidence level is, I'm pretty confident. I think Joe Mixon is a big piece of this overall. Week 1 we saw in a good matchup. They did completely fine on the ground. They gave the dude 30 carries against the Colts, but a lot of teams have ran against the Colts this year. Front 7 dealing with injuries and just hasn't been great. But I think other issues are pretty fixable. Like right now, Laramie Tunsil, he's been their only run blocker in the top 70 according to PFF grades right now. Not great, but for him, that's good. We kind of expect that out of Tunsil, but he has 12 penalties. You alluded to the penalties, 5 more than any other offensive lineman right now for Tunsil. Like that's something that seems like you can probably clean that up in the overall offensive line, the 40 penalties you point to. That with Mixon coming back gives me some confidence, but like, yeah, I mean, the personnel is still a concern outside of Tunsil. Even the tight end room, like Dalton Schultz isn't known as a blocker. So far this year, he hasn't been blocking well when you're talking about either pass protection or run blocking. So all these things, like you were mentioning, it sets up bad situations. It sets up 2nd and 12s, 3rd and 9 or longer, and now you're not on efficient or in a place to make an efficient play And you're just kind of in a spot where the defense knows what's coming. So I think Mixon is a big help, and I think just cleaning up the penalties will help as well. Mixon expected to return this week. Hopefully that leads to some more early down success rate runs.
Yeah, you look at the Texans, they play the Bills in week 5. If there's something, how is that a 1 p.m. game on CBS? Give me a freaking break. I need that. That one's going to be on the big screen here. You watch the Bills and the Ravens game on Sunday Night Football last week. The way to beat the Bills is to run it at them and get ahead of them, okay? Like force them kind of into those game scripts. I don't think a lot of teams are going to be able to do that. I don't think the Texans are really built to do that, but let's see. Maybe they prove me wrong with Joe Mixon coming back here. He is definitely looking like a pretty pivotal addition for them after what we saw in week 1 and what it's looked like without him. I don't know that he's just the full answer here. I do think they got to get better play up front. But yeah, hopefully we continue to get those moments from them so that we can continue to jack up expectations for all of these Texans fantasy players. Number 4, we need to talk about this Dolphins run game. I hinted a little bit at it on the solo recap yesterday on the pod, but per Next Gen Stats, the Dolphins run game has the highest stuff rate in the league. So that's a run of 2 yards or negative, like fewer than 2 yards, negative yards, whatever. 29.9% of their runs are stuffed according to Next Gen Stats. So like a third of their runs are just going absolutely nowhere. And Sal, that is despite the fact that they're running into light boxes at the second lowest rate in the league, 11.2%, according to Next Gen Stats. I threw this stat out there last night on the solo recap. I'm going to do it again here. This is from Austin Gale of The Ringer. The Dolphins had the best rushing success rate in the league by magnitudes last season. It was the 7th best rushing offense by EPA of the last 10 years. They ranked 31st in the same metric this year. The only worst team is the Raiders, who are, as I just mentioned, historically bad at running the ball right now. So, I mean, Achane is totally screwed. That's a mess. That's a mess. Raheem Mostert coming back is that going to help fix the run game here? I don't know. It is just very much just, I don't know how else to say it. It's a little disturbing to me, Sal, that like we take Tua out of the mix here and this offense just completely goes to hell. I was feeling pretty good about Achane after the first couple weeks in the usage. Even in week 3, I'm like, okay, not bad. Now I'm a little nervous if I have Devon Achane on fantasy teams and pretty much anybody involved with the Dolphins right now.
Yeah, you just have to hope at this point that Tua is indeed going to come back in week 8 for all these pieces on Miami. That's the only saving grace with these guys on your rosters. And yeah, I mean, maybe offensive lines matter. Like maybe that's a thing. Like there's this thought process, like the Shanahan system a little bit. You can scheme out your offensive line. And a lot of the times if you're doing it well with your starters in there, your starting quarterback, personnel out there, you can get away with it. But right now, the Dolphins aren't. Instead of investing in the offensive line this offseason, they didn't replace Robert Hunt. They didn't really bring in any key free agents. They only drafted a second-round pick, a tackle, Patrick Paul. And that's starting to show a little bit when you actually have to use your run game and rely on your offensive line because guys like Tyler Huntley or Skylar Thompson are in the game. And the focal point of your offense has to transition to the running game. We just haven't seen it been playing out right now. Devon Achane, who was probably the most efficient running back in the NFL last year in terms of like yards per touch, yards per carry. NFL records were set. This year, he's 47th out of 53 running backs in rushing EPA. Believe it or not, just 3.4 yards per carry, whatever you want to take that stat as, 48th in the NFL. It's bad. Like Raheem Mostert coming back, okay, that's a piece of the personnel that maybe was supposed to be in there on some of these play designs that Achane is getting right now, and maybe that changes some things up, gives Mike McDonald at least another player to use, whether it's a deceptive piece or just a playmaker in the offense. So that I think is a positive if and when he comes back, hopefully pretty soon. The team's getting strong play out of Terran Armstead, out of Liam Eichenberg on the offensive line. So like that's something you can hang your hat on if these other pieces can come together. But overall right now, defenses are just like, we see what you have at quarterback. We're not scared about it. Well, like you said, soft fronts, they're just waiting back. And if you don't get some big gains on early downs on the ground, you're into really bad situations for the Dolphins passing attack. And yeah, it's pretty ugly.
Oh, God, yeah, it's ugly. Week 5 game against the Patriots, and they go on the bye. They get the Colts and the Cardinals coming out of the bye. We better see something. I mean, they have not taken a snap with the lead yet this year, Sal. That's how pathetic things have been in Miami. I mean, again, I think Tua's a good player, but it's just really rough that you take him out of the mix here, and you're just not a functional offense anymore. It's not good. And yeah, it's so funny you mentioned the thing about offensive lines and like, hey, Terran Armstead, obviously a really good player. They've got some dudes up there, but you hear this all the time with offensive lines. Like you're just as strong as like your weakest link, and they have multiple weak links, especially from a run game perspective. So it is brutal right now for Devon Achane in his fantasy outlook. We'll see. Maybe Raheem Mostert helps, but week 5 against the Patriots, I don't know if you have better options in a bye week and things like that, but he might be somebody I'd be considering on like kind of that flex bubble instead of like a definite must start. All right, my 5th and final stat, another running back. Let's talk about him from that Monday night doubleheader. Kenneth Walker, pretty freaking electric in his return from injury. Per Next Gen Stats, in that first game off injury, Kenneth Walker was efficient on the ground, rushing 12 times for 80 yards and 3 touchdowns, 6.7 yards per carry overall. He generated positive EPA on 6 of his 12 runs. Walker was most efficient, according to Next Gen Stats, rushing from under center. He finished with 55 yards on 6 carries and 2 touchdowns, 9.2 yards per carry compared to 25 yards on 6 carries and a touchdown on shotgun runs. I remain very bullish on the Seahawks team overall, definitely on the offense, very bullish there. And I feel like I never talk about Kenneth Walker enough, Sal, because I'm so like focused on the receivers and how well Geno's playing and all this stuff. But he's a guy I think is probably an RB1 going forward. You look at the usage for Kenneth Walker versus Zach Charbonnet. I was like, hey, Walker kind of coming off an injury. Will he be eased in? Because Charbonnet's given them some good play. Walker took 60.3% of the snaps. He owned a 63.2% carry share, rushing attempt share in this offense. That was compared to 10.5 for Charbonnet. They both had 5 targets, but Walker ran 29 routes to 18 routes for Charbonnet, according to Fantasy Points data. So clear-cut feature back of this offense that I think is a good unit. So yeah, I think Walker is a guy that is again, running back 1 rest of the way. Somebody that, again, I just feel like I never talk about Kenneth Walker enough, but what a baller. And a guy that, as long as he's healthy, is a definite, I think, top 12, top 10 player at the position going forward.
Yeah, I think top 10, in my opinion, for sure, is where I'm ranking him right now. And yeah, like same thing here. Walker was just kind of a guy who always seemed properly valued. Maybe we didn't bake in what his ceiling could be more, or probably we just didn't bake in all the other players in the NFL getting injured this year. So now he's standing out a little bit more. But no, I think the most encouraging piece of this is kind of what you alluded to with his usage. He comes right back off of an injury where he's limited practice all week, and he sees everything. Like Zach Charbonnet was playing well. They could have easily just said, let's give him some touches. It's a tough matchup against the Lions. We can ease back in Kenneth Walker. No, 12 carries for Walker, just 2 for Charbonnet. And what I said was a tough matchup. Like the Lions came into this allowing just 3.6 rushing yards per game.
Great point.
Yeah, the second fewest in the NFL. Only the Ravens were allowing less at 3 yards per rushing play. So that's encouraging. The other piece that's encouraging, now this was a game script thing most likely, but he sees 5 targets in this game. But in week 1, before he left with injury, which was late in the game, he saw 3 targets. So if we can get in this situation, we're starting to bank in these maybe 3-catch games, maybe even more here and there for Kenneth Walker, which in the summer we got some coach speak around, yeah, we actually like the way that we could use him in that regard. If that's the case, well then, yeah, now you start to flirt with like this 3-down usage and a guy that can start to threaten every week for these top 5 finishes like he was this past week, number 2 only behind Derrick Henry. So everything's trending up. This is the offense that I want pieces of right now. It's one of the offenses that I really want pieces of. And at this point, you can't trade for him after a 30-point performance. But Kenneth Walker, if he's on your team, you're feeling good.
100%. Next 3 weeks for Kenneth Walker. Giants, 49ers, then they travel to Atlanta to take on the Falcons. I know that seems like some intimidating pieces there in Giants and 49ers, but Giants are 22nd in rushing success rate allowed. The 49ers are 24th. The Falcons are dead last. And then in weeks 8 and 9, they get the Rams and the Bills and the Rams. So 2 teams you could definitely run on. These are all bottom half of the league run defenses coming up. So while I love the passing game, I think they're going to try to just put the ball in Kenneth Walker's belly and take a little bit of pressure off Geno Smith, who was under siege all night against the Lions. My only concern is, I mentioned that Kenneth Walker is, and this is a small concern, just kind of something to watch as their offense maybe coalesces throughout the course of the year. I mentioned that Walker was super efficient on under center runs more so than kind of his shotgun runs. And that makes sense. He's a downhill kind of explosive rusher. You want him sort of in that Derrick Henry mold that I've talked about, getting the head of steam and bursting through the line of scrimmage. They're actually not a great under center passing team. Geno has just 25 yards on under center plays so far this year. He has the second lowest adjusted net yards per attempt on under center plays among quarterbacks with 4 games this year. Only Jalen Hurts is worse. He's actually in the negative, so he's way, way worse. But yeah, that's just something to monitor because you think about like getting under center and taking deep drops from under center. They cannot pass protect right now. That could be an issue. So just keep that in mind as we see sort of them go against some of these defenses that don't defend the run well, but do pressure the passer with some of these edge rushers. Maybe that just means more and more work for Kenneth Walker as they try to take that pressure off of Geno in the passing game. Okay, let's take one final break. We come back. Sal has 3 moves that you need to make right after this. All right, Sal. Get us started with the first move that people need to make as these week 5 buys begin to hit us.
Yeah, we're going to stay with the Seattle Seahawks. Right now, I'm trying to trade for Jackson Smith and Jigba basically everywhere that I can. I think he's a great value that you don't have to spend a lot on. Even this past week in a game where the Seahawks threw 56 times, the target share was there, though. 12 total targets, but a 23% target share, only behind DK Metcalf on the team, who looks like the clear alpha at this point. But JSN, right now, through 4 weeks, number 8 in wide receiver expected points right now, according to PFF, but overall 39th in actual points. So that just basically means his role has been good. There's been plays there that haven't come through. And for some players, it's like they're probably not going to come through. The offense, the quarterback situation isn't great. But for JSN, it is. Like, this offense is a borderline top 10 offense right now in terms of EPA per play. Geno Smith is second in the NFL in completion percentage, completing 72% of his passes, only behind Jaden Daniels, who's setting records right now. So everything looks pretty good here. So if you can get a situation where you can buy low for a JSN, who in this game, there wasn't as much downfield usage. A couple of targets downfield, a lot of quick passes, but I think that was the matchup as we've been alluding to on the show today. Like, Geno Smith was under pressure nonstop in this game against Aiden Hutchinson and this defense of Detroit. So I think the quick passes were there for JSN. But he's a piece I mentioned earlier with Kenneth Walker. I want pieces of this offense. This might be the most affordable one that has upside that you can currently get.
Love that. 100% with you. Like the usage for JSN. Have liked it all year long. I mean, look, he scammed his way to a decent PPR game in this one, but that wasn't so much just goofy usage or anything like that. The Lions were just, and Troy Aikman highlighted this, and I thought it was so true. They were just great disciplined tacklers in this game, and that's been a nice transition from Lions defenses of old. The Lions right now have only missed 16 tackles on the year. That is tied for the 3rd fewest in the NFL with the Steelers and the Saints. You look at some of the teams that the Seahawks will be facing here pretty shortly. You know, you're kind of on the other end of the spectrum there with teams like the Falcons I highlighted, the Rams before the bye. They are definitely not this in terms of quality tackling, not really out there. So like a couple of those plays, JSN just makes one guy miss. The Lions don't, and I don't think it was anything with him or he's not explosive, things like that. It's just these like very, very shoestring type plays. And we could be talking about a much bigger game. As we're talking about these pass protection issues, it's worth noting that I have no idea if this is going to move the needle at all. But Jason Peters, 9-time Pro Bowl offensive tackle, is back with the Seahawks practice squad. How old is Jason Peters at this point? He's got to be, I mean,
I think it's 41.
He's 41.
That's my guess. That's my complete guess. I don't know.
I mean, I know he was definitely 40 last year. He's like he's 40. Oh, bro, he's 42. He's 42. He turned 42 in January.
I mean, nothing wrong with that.
Congratulations.
Nothing wrong with that.
Hey, no. Congratulations. Aaron Rodgers is no longer the oldest player in the league. That ruins the oldest to youngest player connection between Aaron Rodgers and Braylon Allen when he throws Braylon Allen touchdowns, like a touchdown from the oldest to youngest player in the league. Does ruin that, and I have no idea if Jason Peters at freaking 42 years old is going to help the Seahawks offensive line, but it is definitely, that is one issue there that they have there. But at the same time, those are just going to lead to more quick hitting plays on JSN. So, yeah, I mean, would you kind of have like a guess of like rest of season what you might want to like move for a guy like JSN, or is he more of these like, hey, try to get him in like a 2-for-1 type deal?
First player that maybe comes to mind, like I would go Rachaad White, like instantly. The sentiment's a little bit low on him, so that might be harder to pull off. A Cortland Sutton off of back-to-back good weeks with a package of somebody else in there. Maybe you can pull that. A Cortland Sutton and a Rico Dottle type package deal, something like that. I'm not sure if that's enough to move the needle, but we haven't had like the last 2 weeks big games, and even 2 weeks ago he kind of let you down. This past week maybe barely got you there, so it's not like the sentiment is high right now on JSN. You could probably get a deal done.
Yeah, he's going to probably catch 100 passes this year. It might be just low yards per reception, but I do think there's more explosive plays on the table for JSN. So definitely a guy that I think is having a nice second season. Hit me with your next move to make here, Sal.
Yeah, I want to buy low on Josh Jacobs because the sentiment is very low on him. He hasn't had a top 20 performance this year, which is crazy at the position since he's had a 151-yard game and 104 total yard game to open the season. So those performances were solid. Then in week 3, he only gets about 5 fantasy points. It was Emmanuel Wilson. I keep saying Emmanuel Sanders. Emmanuel Wilson, who ends up going out there and having a nice day on his touches, 14 compared to 15 for Jacobs. So that kind of started maybe a little bit of a worry for people around Jacobs. And then this past week, he doesn't have a huge fantasy day, but he was just fine. Like he kind of took that backfield back over if he ever lost it, over 60% of the snaps, 65% of the opportunities in a brutal matchup against the Vikings when your team is down 3 to 4 scores and he's still going out there and averaging 6 yards per touch. And a big key here, Jordan Love coming back opens up more of the passing game usage for Josh Jacobs. They're not going to be down 3 to 4 scores and Jacobs going to catch 4 balls like he did this past week. But in week 1, he saw 3 targets. This past week, he saw 6 targets. With Malik Willis for 2 weeks, he saw 1 total target. Like that is another piece of the offense that gets opened up here. And everything I'm seeing right now, at least in comments, people sending me messages, seems to be concern around Josh Jacobs' role, when I think it's just basically the same. Hasn't had his quarterback, and he's been leaned on this offense. Matt LaFleur knows how to coach up a running game. That's what the Packers want to work off of, is their running game. And Josh Jacobs is their number 1 back still, last time I checked. So I feel good about it. He's breaking tackles. He's averaging 5 yards per touch this year. I'm trying to buy low on Josh Jacobs.
I saw this one on the dock, and I was like, ooh, this is interesting because there is a lot of like Emmanuel Sanders, or goddamn, now you got me saying
there it is.
Emmanuel. There's a lot of sentiment about Emmanuel Wilson is stealing some work from Josh Jacobs. Like Matt LaFleur, he's always used a committee. He's always used a backfield committee, has Matt LaFleur, so he must do it once again. And yet I'm with you that, because so my first instinct was like, oh, I don't know about this one, Sal. But you do have me thinking about the fact that he is right now, in terms of half PPR fantasy points, he's the running back 27 on the year, and yet he's 7th in the NFL in rushing. When two things don't quite line up like that, that tells you maybe passing game usage and touchdowns. Not scored a rushing touchdown this year. And you're so right that the passing stats are probably deflated because of the 2 Malik Willis games. So, yeah, at first I was like, I don't know about this one, Sal, but you are making some pretty good arguments as well to why Jacobs might be a buy right now.
Yeah, and also with like Malik Willis, they weren't moving the ball downfield as much to get into the end zone. Jacobs had a touchdown called back in, I believe, the second game of the year against the Colts. So, yeah, this is a situation where I think that Jacobs looks a lot better if he's literally just scored 1 time this year to people, but he hasn't. So a lot of people are just skittish on him. Can probably move him for a cheap piece right now, like maybe even a wide receiver 3 on some teams, throw in another running back, a cheap running back, like I keep saying, Rico Dotto, someone who just produced, and you can get yourself, who I believe Jacobs is like a borderline top 30, top 35 rest of season player.
I mean, yeah, if you've got, I don't know, we talked about Rashid Shaheed and like how we like him, but like I might rather, like that would be a trade that the team that has Jacobs that is weak at wide receiver, and he's a guy that is been producing for you, but you have an excess of wide receivers. You need a running back. That's potentially a trade you could make. Maybe a Xavier Worthy coming off a big game with Rashee Rice injury. Terry McLaurin. I mean, I love Terry McLaurin, but like I think that if Jacobs hits, this is the thing, like you got to make a trade that might hurt your team a little bit here, because Jacobs is a player that was drafted high and people know his name and he's attached to a good offense. So it might be still a little difficult, but one of these guys that has given you weeks and could potentially, like Rashid Shaheed stands out as a player to me that Rashid Shaheed, great pick. He's going to go down as a big value, but is he going to be the reason you win your fantasy league? Probably not. Josh Jacobs could be if it comes together for him. And I will say, Sal, just last point before I throw it back to you on this and maybe some other receiver suggestions, things like that. You want to do this? Better do it right now. As we talk about the matchup at the top of the show, Rams week 5, Cardinals week 6. Those 2 teams are 30th and 29th respectively in rushing success rate allowed.
Yeah, do it right now. I even like, this is maybe like a similar tier player, but depending on your needs on your team, like a DJ Moore, I'm okay going 1 for 1 right now
for sure.
in trades for. Tony Pollard off a big game, if same position's always weird, but that's something that can maybe get it done, add in some other player at that point. But I want to get Josh Jacobs because I think he's the workhorse running back. Even in week 3, when Emmanuel Wilson had that big game, the first quarter and a half when the game was actually close, it was all Josh Jacobs. And then Wilson gets a little bit of a hot hand, gets some more touches, especially in the fourth quarter when the Packers are up 2 to 3 scores. So I'm not concerned about his role in this offense, and I think this offense is pretty good right now. Just got Jordan Love back. Literally after this, I'm going to go and try and buy for him.
I like it. All right, Sal, give me your third and final move that people need to make this week.
Yeah, I was saying this last week, and I still think you can get him for a cheap price. It's buying Ladd McConkey right now, and I'm not going to say buying low off of probably his best performance of the season, but he's entering his bye week, and that's important because there's going to be teams in your league, and maybe the manager needs a win desperately and can't afford to just not have somebody to replace Ladd McConkey's production, so you get him a little bit cheaper than you normally would. But early on in the year, it was like Quentin Johnson scoring all these touchdowns. And he's definitely improved as a player this year. Like, he's a piece of that offense. But the alpha on this team, to me, is Ladd McConkey. At least a 21% target share in all 4 of his games this year. He's a rookie. Quentin Johnson has done that one time in his 21 career games. One time at 21% target share. It was in week 2 this year. So I think McConkey's earning the targets at this point. They head into the bye week. I think that's only going to maybe help his role a little bit more, and they can put him into some more creative ways. So McConkey is somebody I'm looking to get. And this is a guy who has legit juice. There was a 2nd and 10 in the third quarter. He gets put into the slot, runs over the middle of the field, 37 yards, and he's outrunning basically every single defensive back before he gets pushed out of bounds. So it's a situation where if you could trade like Rachaad White, we mentioned him earlier, if you could trade some sort of Cortland Sutton deal, I'd rather have McConkey right now over those guys for sure. Pushing into like my top 75-ish overall players towards the top 65.
I dig it. He seems like a clear-cut, second half of the year post-bye rookie bump type of player for sure. Quentin Johnson was kind of leading the team in first read targets and things like that early on in the year. And look, I think they're using Johnston in better ways. He looks more confident. He's definitely a better player than what he showed as a rookie. But I still think that the best receiver on this roster and the most likely target leader, at least should be the top receiver on this team, will be Ladd McConkey. I'm just hoping for Justin Herbert's sake that the offensive line can get healthier, because that was one frustrated dude coming out of that week 4 matchup. I felt for somebody asked me in my Discord this week, Sal, how are we feeling about Justin Herbert right now? I said, I'm feeling sympathetic towards Justin. That's my only feeling about Justin Herbert right now, is sympathetic. So I'm hoping more Ladd McConkey, layup targets, get Justin Herbert some help there. And I feel like Ladd is a really good one of these rookie buys right now. And I love the timing of doing it as he enters his bye week.
Yeah, Justin Herbert needs some sympathy and condolences. Jacoby Brissett, these quarterbacks that are just getting sent out there to get hit. But at least Justin Herbert's going into the bye, helps his injury, the ankle, and hopefully helps some of the offensive line injuries that are happening right now as well.
All right, Sal, that was great stuff. Tell the people what else you've got coming up on the site this week.
Yeah, Wednesday. So by the time you're listening to this, it should be out. The trades piece, running backs and wide receivers to be targeting in trades, a little bit more of what we just discussed, enhanced. And then you can go Thursday, matchups to exploit. Friday, key findings for the entire week to know before setting your lineups in week 5.
Boom. Make sure you're checking all that out from Sal on the Yahoo Spaces. And for now, that is going to do it for this show. Appreciate Sal for joining as he does every single week. We will be back tomorrow on Thursday. The Fantasy Film Room with Nate Tice is back once again. We're going to do a rookie deep dive, a rookie check-in. So we might be talking more about some Ladd McConkey and those type of players. We'll also preview a Thursday night game between the Saints and Bucks. So, man, this is going to be an NFC South heavy week here on the program. Until then, we are out.